Okay, now we're going to look at the different types of ways that you can perform a survey or take a study of something. One of those ways is an observational study. So first, it's an observational study. And basically what you do there is you observe the members of a sample in such a way that they're not affected by the study. So in other words, if I went back to that example of watching or wanting to know the number of students who drive vehicles to school, then I could stand out in the parking lot and I could watch the number of students who walk across the parking lot and go to the student parking area and count them, but I'm not affecting anything they're doing. I'm just standing back, I'm observing them, and I'm counting how many of them walk to the parking lot. Okay, another one is a controlled experiment. Okay, a controlled experiment. And that's where you divide your sample into two different groups and you impose a treatment on one group, but on the other group that you call your control group, they don't get that treatment. And then you compare the effects of the treated group versus the control group. And the best example I can think of that is the new COVID vaccine that we've had to come out this year. So when they first started this, they asked people to volunteer to come in and take the COVID vaccine. Some of those people they actually gave the COVID vaccine to. Other people that were considered the control group did not receive the COVID vaccine. And then they compared how those two different groups compared to each other in whether they received the vaccine or they did not receive the vaccine. And then one final way is to do a survey. And I think most of us know what a survey is, but that's where you ask every member of your sample a set of questions. So we might take the students at Randleman High School and we might ask them a set of questions about coming back to school full time next year, all 5 days during the week. So that's what we're talking about. Now, when you do a survey, I want to point out to you that sometimes you can have poorly written surveys. So your survey questions can introduce bias. And you want to be real careful about that. So you want your survey questions to be, and right here's your key, you want them to be clear, precise, and fair, because you want everyone to hear the exact same questions. So some of the things that you should avoid when you are creating survey questions are these things. You don't want to combine two or more issues, okay? So you don't want to put two things in the same one. Like I wouldn't want to say, do you think that the school's cafeteria should serve chicken and pizza? You're putting two issues in the same one, chicken and pizza. Either ask about chicken or ask about pizza, but don't ask about both in the same question. Okay, so another thing you want to avoid is using double negatives. You don't want to use double negatives. So I'm trying to think here just for double negatives. If we were looking at, if you were writing a question for a double negative, it might be something about, isn't our school not aware of the current issues students face? Something like that. So you said, isn't our school not aware? You put two double negatives in there. So you don't want to put two negative statements in the same question. Another thing you want to avoid is overlapping your answer choices. So you don't want two of your answer choices to contain the same thing. Number 4, you want words that cause strong reactions, and I like to call that a loaded question. You don't want to have a loaded question in there. Like you don't want to say something about, do you think this is the way it should be for this situation? You don't want to give them any idea of what they should think. You want them to be able to think on their own for what the answer should be. And then the last thing you want to do is avoid a leading question. So, in other words, you wouldn't want to start a sentence with, don't you agree? Because then you're already saying, hey, you should agree with this. Don't you agree? So you don't want to ask them a leading question either. So let me give you some examples of kind of what we're talking about here. So, for example, is there any bias in the survey question? So let's look down here. Do you think farmers should use poison to control insects on crops? Now, if you look at that, this is a loaded question because right here, this word poison, that loads the question for you. So this is a loaded question. You don't want to add anything in there. Maybe the better question might be, do you think farmers should spray their plants with anything to control insects on crops? Don't use the word poison. So let's look at the next one. Don't you agree that most child care workers are underpaid? Well, that don't you agree is a leading question. You're leading them to agree with you. So that's the problem. So this is a leading question. Okay? Now, the last thing we're going to look at is just an example of designing a survey. So during the 2008 Olympic Games, a U.S. swimmer won more gold medals than any other Olympic swimmer ever before. What sampling method could you use to find the percent of students in your school who recognize that swimmer from a photo? And what is an example of a survey question that is likely to yield information that has no bias? So there is no right or wrong answer here. You can choose any sampling method, but you want to choose a question that doesn't introduce bias. So I'm going to give you an example of what could be an answer. So I could use a convenience sample, and I could ask students as they enter school. I probably wouldn't want to ask them as they leave because they're in a hurry to get out. But as they're entering, it would be convenience sample. Okay. What kind of question could I ask? So for my question, I could have a photo of the person who did this, and I could say, do you know the person in this picture? Do you know the person in this picture? Show them that photo and see if they know who it is. Again, there's no right or wrong answer here. Okay, so you can have different answers there. All right, guys, let me know if you have any questions, as always.